Hello and welcome. The power of the media is enough to bring down governments, create celebrities out of ordinary people, change lifestyles, or even remove products off the shelves. It could be argued that those who control the media control our lifestyles. In the United States, the presidency of Richard Nixon ended with his resignation in August of 1974 through the investigative work of Washington Post reporters Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward. And that was an incident named Watergate, of course. Nowadays, investigative work is less common, and in its place is public relations, which shapes the stories the public follows. With the huge number of newspapers and magazines now available across the shelves on international markets, managing information, and perhaps more importantly, perception, is not only a lucrative industry, but one that works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. One of the most powerful men in the British PR system is our guest today. Max Clifford started out in the music industry, working with celebrities such as the Beatles, Frank Sinatra, Marlon Brando and Muhammad Ali. Over the years, he's become the person the big names from entertainment, business, sports and politics turn to when they want a story managed. On today's show, we ask, should there be a control on the power of spin, as it's called, and who decides what makes the headlines? Don't forget, you can join in. Max Clifford, great to have you with us.
Thank you, Rich. Nice to see you.
Well, listen, I've got to start by asking about the economic crisis that's taken a grip around the world. I know you feel the media's at a hand in making it as bad as it is. Why is that?
Well, the British media more and more are increasingly destructive, Riz. I mean, I don't know how things are in the States, but not quite to the same degree over here. And the problem is that right from the start, when the financial crisis was underway, the British media overplayed it and made it even worse than it was, which in some ways made the problem even bigger than it was. And consequently, I suppose you would say, to sum it up, that we made a really bad situation into a crisis. But that's generally the way the British media works. I mean, when I started out, it was mostly about promotion. 45 years ago. These days, the biggest part of my job as PR for stars or companies or organizations is trying to protect my clients from the excesses of the media.
I'll ask you a bit more about that just in a little while, Max, but you know, this word crisis, it's interesting you say how the media turns something into a crisis. The word crisis seems to be very popular in I guess, trying to make headlines. How do you see the way the media labels things nowadays?
Well, they try to label things as sensationally as possible, Riz, because the bigger the sensation, hopefully they believe, the more interest there is in people buying newspapers. We're very much a newspaper country, and in recent years, or in the last decade, there's been a steady decline. We still read an awful lot of papers for a small country, but that means that the circulation battles get ever more ferocious, and it becomes ever more important for editors to put sensational headlines across the front pages, even if the substance that follows doesn't justify it, in the hope it sells newspapers.
Right, and as you were talking, we saw also some pictures of covers of newspapers and magazines regarding the financial crisis, a lot of them looking at the US financial crisis, and one of them said, how scared should you be? I wonder if I could put an email question we got to you from Mary in Maryland, here in the USA. She wrote out an email pointing out how much the American government constantly justified the $700 billion bailout, saying that the world economy would collapse without it. And she says, was this spin intended to scare Americans into pressuring their representatives to pass the legislation? If the government's gloom and doom predictions were at least in part tactical, did the consumer panic they created contribute to the subsequent drops in the stock market?
Yeah, I wish I understood the question, but I think
it's the same as
the reality of it is that, yes, I mean, yeah, what was in the media in many ways did make, as I said earlier, the situation far worse. You know, obviously they're there to inform, but you know, they were writing in this country about banks closing that didn't close, and that caused all kinds of problems for, you know, one or two banks that were named, which was a good example. There was an exclusive report on the BBC about financial events that were about to take place, and because it was leaked in advance of the government wanting it to come out, it caused an awful lot of financial problems for ordinary people all over Britain. Of course, the journalist was doing his job and got an exclusive, but it caused an awful lot of harm to an awful lot of people financially. So, you know, the media is in the middle of a minefield, and often they create the minefield.
The question is, will the public ever learn? Will they ever look back and say, actually, we were duped and we shouldn't believe it this time?
Yeah, I think that more and more people, particularly in this country and I think around the world, is waking up to the fact that public relations is meant to be about spin, but the reality of things is that journalists are spinning all the time. You know, simply in this country, if you go to a press conference given by any particular politician, the report you read the following day will vary considerably because of the politics and the political spin of that particular paper. You know, you can go to a press conference, a media conference, and read 10 reports which are totally conflicting. And it's purely down to the political influence of the editor and the publisher of the paper or outlet that is covering it. And I think people are realising it more and more. As Peter Elliott and other media commentators have said many times, that there's far more spin in Fleet Street than there is in public relations.
Interestingly enough, politics, you mentioned, you know, are a staple diet for the media, and I know that the US presidential race is pretty well covered in the British media, much more than I guess British politics are in the American media. But it's this US presidential race seems to have become a major media circus. In particular, it seems that public relations and media management in this US presidential race seem to have reached another level. What have you spotted about this, the way this US presidential election campaigning has been handled, that seems to be different, if at all?
Yes, I mean, you know, obviously it's far more intense in America, but we get a lot of coverage of the American presidential election in Britain. And I would say it's been far more colourful than previous elections. And the headlines have been far more demonstrative, far more outrageous than in previous elections. And I think it all comes down to what I was saying earlier about, you know, that sensation attracts. Although it's interesting because one of my clients, as I mentioned to you previously, Riz, is Simon Cowell, and I believe more people voted for American Idol than the last American presidential election.
You know, it's interesting because you talk about PR as PR being much more about protection of the client now than promotion, and it's interesting that the presidential campaign seemed to be far more negative in their campaigning. You know, sort of slandering or at least trying to find negative things to say about the other candidates. How much does the PR come in to try to protect the one who's being you know, accused?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, you know, when anybody comes to me, I make it very clear. If I don't know more about you than anybody else, I can't do my job. You're wasting your money and my time because promotion is the biggest part. I mean, and many a politician has come to me for help over the years, or a bit of advice and guidance. When Roger Kitter, who was a prominent name many years ago, got involved with Hilda Baker, he came to me to make sure that no one was aware of it because, you know, he was married with 6 children and a mortgage. And we managed to keep the whole thing quiet, but as he said to me many times since, his career would have been finished otherwise.
Right. You know, on that issue of the US politics, if I could put to you an email question that came in from Washington here in the USA, and Kenneth Miles wrote in saying, the McCain-Palin ticket is a mess. Should Sarah Palin keep up the folksy routine? It seems to be doing more harm than good. And since the last debate is tomorrow, what would you tell John McCain to do to seem less angry?
Well, maybe he's got to smile a bit, but the problem is that there's not too much room for manoeuvre, I don't think, with either of them. From what I know, from what I understand, which is probably a lot less than you do, you know, they haven't got too many images to portray because I think pretty much both of them come across, this is what we are, and take it or leave it. There's not, whereas over here we have a potential Prime Minister called David Cameron, who, you know, changes according to what time of day and what would make him popular, in a very convincing fashion. He was a PR man and he's trying to recreate himself as a politician.
Well, I know traditionally you've been a Labour supporter, David Cameron, of course, being Conservative. And I wanted to ask you regarding the former Prime Minister John Major's government. You were working very hard to try to bring down that government because you felt the National Health Service was mismanaged. How does one go about bringing down a government?
Well, it wasn't too difficult in John Major's case, mainly because of, I suppose I would say, hypocrisy. John was the Prime Minister. He was preaching to the nation about family values, looking after, respecting the family, and all the time he was having an affair, which came out sometime later, as were some other prominent Conservatives, notably David Mellor, who was a cabinet minister at the time. So I think it was really a question of the word sleaze came into politics in a very powerful way, and I think that was very damaging to the Conservatives. But also the hypocrisy. In other words, don't do what I say, what I do what I say, and naturally the British people resented that.
Let me get a quick question.
Caused the Conservative Party.
Right. I was going to get a quick question in actually before we take a break that came in by email from a viewer in Indiana who's been following British politics. Bernice Rhines, who wrote in saying, "What would you advise Gordon Brown to do? He seems to be floundering."
Well, I would say the opposite is true, that this drama, this disaster, the financial drama around the world, is the best thing that's ever happened to Gordon Brown, because his popularity had gone from being very high to extremely low. But when it comes to the financial side of things and how he's managed things in the last week, it seems to be that what Gordon Brown has set down for this country, which most people, including his rival politicians from rival parties, have agreed is the best for us at this time. His plan has been picked up not only by Europe but also by America. Right. So right now the man is probably more popular than he's been for a long, long time because of the way he's handled this crisis.
Well, Max Clifford, don't go away. We've got more questions. We'll be back after a short break.